Have you ever had one of those moments when everything around you suddenly feels like it's standing still, and all you can focus on is one person, one memory, one moment that feels so real, so vivid, that you can't believe it's happening? What would you do if you unexpectedly ran into someone you once loved, someone you thought you would never see again? For Park Bo-gum, it all began on a quiet afternoon in a cozy cafe he often visited to get away from his busy schedule. He loved the atmosphere, simple, peaceful, with the comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air. It was his escape from the demands of his career, a place where he could sit, relax, and clear his head. As he entered the cafe, he was greeted by the familiar sound of light chatter and the soft music playing in the background. He ordered his usual drink and found a seat by the window, where he could enjoy the view of the bustling streets outside. The place was quiet, and for a moment, he thought he would be able to enjoy some time alone, without the distractions of work or the outside world. But then, as he glanced up from his coffee, his eyes locked with hers. His heart skipped a beat, and for a split second, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. She was sitting at a table across the room, sipping her own coffee, completely unaware of his presence. It had been years since they had parted ways without real closure, without saying all the things they should have said. He had often wondered what had happened to her, where she had gone, and whether she ever thought of him. But now, here she was, sitting just a few feet away, as if time had never passed. He stared at her, unsure of what to do. His mind was racing. How could this be happening? How was it possible that, of all places, they would meet again in this little cafe, in this quiet corner of the city? He had no idea what to say or how to approach her. They had shared so much once, but now, after all this time, they were strangers to each other, and yet not. It was her. There was no mistaking it. The same smile, the same eyes, the same presence that had once made him feel as though the world had stopped whenever she was near. And yet, so much had changed. He had changed. She had changed. And even though he could still feel the connection between them, he wasn't sure how to bridge the gap of time that had come between them. He sat there, frozen in place, unsure of whether he should approach her or just let the moment pass. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what might come next. But as the minutes ticked by, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was a moment he couldn't ignore. Finally, he stood up, his hands slightly trembling as he walked toward her table. Each step felt like a step back in time, each movement bringing him closer to a part of his past that he hadn't thought about in years. When he reached her table, he cleared his throat, unsure of what to say. "Excuse me," he began, his voice low but steady. "I hope this isn't too strange, but, are you really her?" She looked up at him, her eyes widening as she recognized him. A moment of surprise flashed across her face, followed by an expression he couldn't quite read as surprise, confusion, maybe even a little disbelief. "Park Bo-gum?" she asked, her voice trembling just a little. It was her. She had recognized him. The shock in her voice mirrored the disbelief he felt. She stood up slowly, as if unsure whether to approach him or just stay where she was. There was a hesitation in her movements, as though she didn't know what to say or how to react. "Is it really you?" she asked again, her voice softer this time, a smile starting to appear on her lips as she took in the sight of him. He smiled, though his heart was still racing. "I never thought I'd see you again," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I've missed you. I didn't know where you went or what happened." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The years between them seemed to vanish, and for the first time in a long time, they were both standing there, facing each other, as if the world had stopped around them. The noise of the cafe, the people coming and going, faded into the background. There was only the two of them, standing in the same place they had once shared so many moments together. "I never thought I'd see you again either," she said, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of surprise and something deeper, something that felt like unfinished business. The silence between them stretched on for a few moments, filled with unspoken thoughts and memories that neither of them had expected to revisit. It was as if the years of separation had melted away in that instant, and all that remained was the feeling of being in the same room again, as if time had rewound itself. The connection was undeniable, yet the distance between them, created by time, circumstance, and silence, was palpable. She sat back down at the table, motioning for him to join her. Park Bo-gum hesitated for a moment before sitting across from her, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't realized how much he had missed her until now, sitting here in front of her, seeing the familiar expression he had once known so well. He looked at her, trying to take in the changes. She looked the same in so many ways, her smile, her eyes, but there was something new about her now, something that told him that life had shaped her in ways he didn't know. And he wondered what had happened to her, what had kept her from reaching out, and why he hadn't been able to do the same. "It's been so long," he said, his voice soft but filled with longing. "I didn't expect this. I never thought we'd meet again, especially like this." She smiled faintly, her eyes flickering with emotion. "Neither did I," she said, her voice full of quiet nostalgia. "I thought about you a lot, though. After everything, after we lost touch. I always wondered where you went, what happened to you. I just never knew how to reach out." Park Bo-gum nodded slowly, understanding the sentiment all too well. "I've thought about you, too," he admitted. "But it's like, we both just moved on, without realizing that we could have tried to reconnect. It's strange, isn't it?" "It is," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think I'd ever get the chance to see you again, to talk to you. But now that I'm sitting here, with you, I realize I never really moved on. I just buried everything, our memories, everything we had." The vulnerability in her words hit him deeply. He knew that they both had their own burdens to carry, their own reasons for keeping their distance. But sitting there with her now, he felt the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. It was as if they were both standing on the edge of something they hadn't realized they were missing until now. "I've never really forgotten what we had," he said quietly. "I don't think I could, even if I wanted to. You were everything to me." Her eyes softened at his words, and for a moment, it seemed like they both understood that there was no easy way to put everything back together. There was no magic solution that would make all the hurt and time apart disappear. But they had found each other again, and that in itself felt like a step toward healing. "Do you think it's too late?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you think we can still try again?" Park Bo-gum looked at her, his heart heavy with the question. Could they? After all that had happened, after the time they had lost, was there even a possibility of rebuilding what they once had? He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I don't know if we can just pick up where we left off, but I'm willing to try. I think we both deserve to see what could happen, don't you think?" She looked at him, her gaze filled with a mix of hope and fear. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice soft. "Afraid that we'll try and fail, or that it won't be the same. I'm afraid of getting hurt again." Park Bo-gum reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. "I'm afraid too," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I don't want to live in fear anymore. I'd rather try and see what happens, even if we don't know the outcome." She looked at their hands, the weight of his words settling in. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of the past, afraid of the future, and afraid of opening her heart again. But here, with him, there was a sense of safety, of trust, that she hadn't felt in years. It was a risk, yes. But maybe, just maybe, it was a risk worth taking. "I don't want to keep living with what ifs," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I want to see where this could go, even if it's uncertain." Park Bo-gum's heart swelled as he squeezed her hand gently. "Then let's take that step. Together." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them contemplating what this meant. It wasn't about making promises they couldn't keep, it was about acknowledging the uncertainty, the risk, and yet still choosing to face it together. Finally, she smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I'm glad we're here," she said softly. "I'm glad we found each other again." Park Bo-gum smiled back, his eyes filled with warmth. "So am I," he whispered. As the days passed, Park Bo-gum and she began to weave their lives together once again, step by step. The first few weeks were filled with small, quiet moments, talking over coffee, revisiting the places they had once shared, and laughing at old jokes they had thought forgotten. They both knew it wasn't going to be easy, but the simple act of being together again felt like something worth fighting for. One afternoon, they decided to take a walk through a different part of the city, somewhere new for both of them, a place that felt unfamiliar but full of potential. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows on the sidewalk, and the streets were bustling with the usual energy of the city. But for the first time in a long time, they felt like they had their own little world. "Do you remember the first time we came to the city together?" Park Bo-gum asked, his voice light but filled with meaning. She laughed softly, her eyes sparkling with the memory. "How could I forget? You got us lost for hours, and we ended up wandering around until we found that tiny cafe. It was awful, and yet I wouldn't change it for anything." He smiled at the memory, the warmth of it filling him. "I remember you were so mad at me for making us walk so far. But in the end, we both agreed that it was one of the best days we had. Because we were together," she said, her voice tender. "It didn't matter how lost we were. It was just about being with you." The simplicity of her words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so much of his life chasing after things, goals, achievements, the idea of what he was supposed to be. But moments like this, moments of connection and quiet understanding, made him realize that the most important things in life weren't the ones he had always strived for. It was the people. It was her. "I've thought a lot about that," he said, his voice quieter now. "About how we used to get lost, but it never felt like a problem. It felt like an adventure." She looked at him, her gaze soft and full of emotion. "Maybe that's what we need to remember," she said gently. "That life doesn't have to be about getting it right all the time. Sometimes, it's okay to get lost and just trust that we'll find our way." He nodded, understanding what she meant. "Maybe we've spent too much time trying to find all the answers, trying to fix everything. But we don't need to know all the answers. We just need to take it one step at a time, together." They stopped for a moment, standing in the middle of the street, watching the world move around them. There was no rush, no pressure. It felt like time had slowed down just for them, as if the universe was giving them a chance to breathe, to exist in this moment without the weight of the past or the worries of the future. "I'm not perfect," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "I don't have everything figured out. I don't know if I can ever make up for everything I've done. But I want to try. I want to try with you." Park Bo-gum looked at her, his eyes filled with sincerity. "You don't have to be perfect. I never expected you to be. I just want to be here, now. And whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't carrying the weight of her past by herself. And as much as the future was still uncertain, she knew that this was the beginning of something important. "I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice full of determination. "I'm ready to take this step with you." Park Bo-gum smiled, his heart swelling with warmth. "Then let's do it. Together." They continued their walk, the world around them still bustling, but now, it felt like they were walking in their own little world, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future had in store. There were no promises of perfection, no guarantees. But in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that they were together, taking the next step, side by side. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows on the sidewalk, Park Bo-gum felt a quiet certainty in his chest. This was right. This was where he was meant to be. Not in the past, not in the future, but here, with her, in this moment. And whatever came next, they would face it, together. The days seemed to flow more easily now, as if the weight of the past was lifting little by little. Park Bo-gum and she had found their rhythm, one of shared moments, quiet conversations, and simple joys. There was no rush to get anywhere, no pressure to figure out the future. They were content to just be, taking the time to learn about each other again, discovering what had changed and what had stayed the same. One evening, after a long day, they found themselves in another cafe, this one tucked away in a quieter part of the city. It wasn't the same as the first one where they had met again, but it felt like a perfect continuation of their journey. The atmosphere was peaceful, and the soft murmur of other patrons filled the air as they sat across from each other, sipping their drinks. Park Bo-gum looked at her thoughtfully, his eyes filled with a question he had been meaning to ask. "Do you ever wonder about how we got here?" he asked softly. How we ended up back in each other's lives. She smiled, her gaze shifting to the window as she took a moment to think. I do, she said, her voice calm but thoughtful. I think about it a lot. How strange it is that after all these years, we found each other again. I used to think that time had taken everything from us, that there was no way we could ever be the same. But now, I see that it's not about being the same. It's about being here, right now, with each other. Park Bo-gum nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. I never imagined this would happen, he admitted, his voice full of emotion. I thought we had lost our chance, that we'd missed our moment. But now I see that maybe this is our moment. Our second chance. For a brief moment, the world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in the soft glow of the cafe lights. The past, with all its uncertainties, seemed so far away now. What mattered wasn't what had happened, but what they were building together in this present moment. I'm glad we found this moment, she said quietly, her voice full of sincerity. I didn't know what I was missing until now. I spent so much time trying to move on, trying to forget, but now I see that it's not about forgetting. It's about embracing everything, our past, our mistakes, and the way we've both changed. Park Bo-gum reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. I feel the same way, he said softly. I've spent so much time wondering about what could have been. But now I realize that what matters is what we choose to do today and tomorrow. We can't go back, but we can create something new. She smiled, a soft and genuine smile that spoke volumes. I don't know where this will go, she said, her voice calm and steady, but I know that I want to try. I want to see where this can take us. Me too, he replied, his voice filled with warmth. I'm willing to try, for us. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each of them lost in their thoughts. The cafe around them continued to bustle, but they were in their own world, a world where the past no longer defined them. They had found each other again, and that was all that mattered. After a while, they stood up and walked out into the cool evening air. The city was still alive with energy, but it felt different now. It was no longer just a place where they were simply passing through. It felt like their city now, a place where they could write their own story, a story that had been interrupted but was now ready to begin again. As they walked together, hand in hand, Park Bo-gum couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle in his chest. The uncertainty of the future still loomed ahead, but for the first time, it didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to embrace, something to explore. And whatever came next, he knew they would face it together. I'm glad we're doing this, she said, breaking the silence. I'm glad we're trying again. Park Bo-gum smiled, his heart full. So am I. And I'm ready for whatever comes next. They continued walking, side by side, with no destination in mind, just the quiet certainty that they had found something worth holding on to. The future was still unknown, but the journey, they knew, was just beginning. The weeks continued to unfold, and each day they spent together felt like another layer of their connection being peeled back, revealing more depth and understanding. Every moment was an opportunity to rediscover each other, not just the people they had once been, but the people they were becoming. The quiet moments, the long conversations, and even the silences between them all built something that was unique and real. There was no rush, no pressure, only a shared desire to move forward, together. One evening, they decided to visit a small bookstore they both loved, a cozy corner in the city filled with old books in quiet corners. As they walked through the aisles, Park Bo-gum noticed how comfortable they had become in each other's presence. There was no awkwardness, no hesitations, just two people who had come to understand each other in ways they hadn't before. I've missed places like this, she said as she ran her fingers along the spines of the books. Places that make me feel grounded. I used to come here all the time when I needed to clear my head. Park Bo-gum smiled, looking around at the familiar setting. I remember coming here with you. It feels like a lifetime ago, but also like no time has passed. She looked at him, her gaze soft. I used to think about us a lot. I thought about the times we spent here, the small moments that felt so significant. And then, when everything changed, I just didn't know how to deal with it. How to move on. But now Being here with you again, it feels like I'm starting to understand how to let go of the past and embrace what's in front of me. Park Bo-gum nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude for the journey they had both undertaken. I feel the same way. We can't change what happened, but we can choose how we move forward. And I'm grateful that we're doing it together. They walked through the bookstore in comfortable silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly as they moved from one aisle to another. It was a simple moment, but it felt profound. Being in this space, rediscovering each other in a way that felt fresh and new, made them realize that there was so much more to explore. Not just in their relationship, but in themselves as well. After a while, they sat in the small cafe area of the bookstore, sipping their drinks in quiet companionship. There was no need for words. They both knew where they stood now. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a mutual recognition that this was real, that this was something worth nurturing. Do you ever think about where we'll be in 5 years? She asked, her voice casual but filled with curiosity. Park Bo-gum looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. I do, he said quietly. And I don't have all the answers. But I know that, wherever we are, I want to be with you. I want to keep building this with you. She smiled, her heart full. Me too. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that if we keep moving forward, we'll be okay. Together. They sat there, talking about their dreams, their hopes for the future, and the things they still wanted to accomplish. The future no longer seemed like something to fear. It was something to look forward to approach with a sense of hope and excitement. The unknown was no longer daunting, it was just another chapter of their story. As they left the bookstore and stepped out into the evening air, Park Bo-gum couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he knew that it was one they would walk together. There were still challenges to face, but they were ready. They had already come so far, and there was so much more waiting for them. Hand in hand, they walked through the city, the lights twinkling in the distance, the sounds of the city blending with the quiet rhythm of their steps. It wasn't about knowing what the future held, it was about being present, being with each other in this moment, and taking things one day at a time. Are you happy? She asked softly, looking up at him with a mixture of hope and curiosity. Park Bo-gum smiled down at her, his heart full. I am. I've never been more sure of anything. She squeezed his hand gently. So am I. And with that, they continued walking, side by side, ready to face whatever came next, together. As the days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. Park Bo-gum and she discovered more about each other with each passing day. They found themselves falling into a rhythm, quiet, steady, but full of warmth. There were no more questions about whether they could pick up where they left off. The uncertainty of the past had faded, and now all that mattered was the future they were creating together. One crisp autumn afternoon, they found themselves walking through a quiet street lined with trees, the leaves turning shades of gold and red. The world around them felt peaceful, and the air was filled with the scent of fallen leaves. They walked in silence for a while, their hands naturally finding each other's, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I've been thinking about how far we've come, she said suddenly, her voice soft but full of meaning. We've been through so much, and yet here we are. I never thought we'd get this far, especially after everything. Park Bo-gum smiled, his heart full. Neither did I, he admitted. But I think the time apart gave us the chance to grow, to become the people we needed to be in order to be together now. And now that we've found each other again, I realize it's not about the past. It's about what we're making together, right here and right now. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. I used to think that time had taken everything from me. But now, I see that time has also given us a chance. A chance to rebuild, to start fresh. I feel the same way, Park Bo-gum said, squeezing her hand gently. I don't want to look back anymore. I just want to keep moving forward with you. They continued walking through the street, the world around them growing quieter as the evening approached. They didn't need to say much. They didn't need to plan everything out or have all the answers. What mattered was that they were together, and that they were ready to take the next step. As they approached a small park, they decided to sit on a bench, taking in the beauty of the surroundings. The park was quiet, and the fading light of the day cast a warm glow over everything. The leaves swirled around them, caught in the breeze, as if nature itself was celebrating the new beginning they had found. Park Bo-gum turned to her, his gaze soft and filled with affection. "I never realized how much I needed this," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "I never realized how much I needed you." She looked at him, her heart swelling with love. "I've missed this," she said, her voice steady but full of meaning. "I've missed being with you. I've missed the way everything feels right when we're together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, simply enjoying the moment. They didn't need to talk constantly. There was something in the stillness between them that spoke volumes. It was the sound of two people who had found each other again, who had learned to heal and to trust, who had decided to build something new from the pieces they had been given. After a while, Park Bo-gum stood up and extended his hand to her. "Come on," he said with a gentle smile. "Let's take another step." She smiled and took his hand, standing up beside him. They continued walking, their steps in sync, no longer burdened by the weight of the past. The future was still uncertain, but they had each other, and that was all that mattered. As they walked through the park, Park Bo-gum looked at her, his heart full of a quiet kind of happiness. "I'm glad we didn't give up," he said softly. "Me too," she replied, her voice filled with certainty. "I'm glad we're here." They didn't know what the future would hold, but they knew one thing for sure: they would face it together, hand in hand, taking it one step at a time.